Tout le long du bois, le long du rivage, il y a trois jolies filles.
Tout le long du bois, le long du rivage, il y a trois jolies filles.
Il y en a une qui par-dessus tout. Quand je vais la voir, je lui fais l'amour.
Il y en a une qui par-dessus. Quand je vais la voir, je lui fais l'amour.
This is Manville, a village on the Blackstone. A giant mill once stood along the banks of this river. It was known as the Manville Mill and employed thousands of people. It was one of the largest cotton manufacturers in the country and brought prosperity to the village and its people. As the mill expanded, many immigrants came to Manville seeking a better life. They were mostly French Canadians from Quebec. The mill is gone now. In 1955, it was ravaged by flood, then totally destroyed by fire. These concrete piers give mute testimony to the strength of this once mighty manufacturing giant. In Episode 2, we will once again journey back to a time when the Manville Mill employed thousands of people.
Tout le long du bois, le long du rivage, il y a trois jolies filles.
Tout le long du bois, le long du rivage, il y a trois jolies filles.
Il y en a une qui par-dessus.
We will examine some of the customs and traditions from that time period and hear stories of childhood memories, happy times and hardships of everyday life growing up in the village. We will examine some of the old pictures to learn about the types of businesses at a time when meat and ice and groceries were delivered by horse and wagon. We will look at Manville during wartime and follow the brave and heroic exploits of some of the villagers who served during World War II. We will also look at some legendary sports figures that had their roots in Manville. We will witness the devastation of several fires in Manville's history and hear stories of tragedy and loss. This is the story of everyday people and their way of life. It is the story of a bygone time. This is the story of Manville, a village on the Blackstone.
This place was known as Grandfather's Falls. Coming back here now brings back many memories. Mostly good memories of hiking and exploring around the rocks, camping under the stars or in the cave, toasting marshmallows by a fire. I remember some of the kids would jump in the pool to cool off in the summer heat. This was a very special place to me.
I worked on the farm all summer, every summer. Everything. Weeding, planting, taking care, picking. We grew sweet corn, cabbage, potatoes. Had a few cows, a couple of workhorses. We used to sell all the cabbage right here, and right in this village here. A lot of Polish people in those days would make sauerkraut. And you'd go from house to house to house. We sold a lot of sweet corn. And I can remember, I tell you the price we used to get for cabbage in those days. It was 2 cents a pound. So if you can see what you pay for a head of cabbage. We used to get 15 to 18 cents a dozen of corn in those days. We used to get 8 cents a quart for milk in those days. with about a third of the bottled cream.
I think most every other family in the village was growing hard. Most every single family had gardens. They had trees. They had pear trees, apple trees. They had all kinds of vegetables they grew. So the people that had yards that were large enough, they always, raised pigs. And every year, at a certain time, every people, probably one weekend to the next, each family killed their own hogs. Then they would cut it up in pieces and preserve it and make their salt pork and either wrap it up in cheesecloth and make all kinds of stuff, keep it for the winter. And I can remember in my wife's family, we used to kill the hog, and then I can remember my wife, and she used to hate that. As they used to bleed the pig, she had to run from the place where they killed it to the house, stirring the blood so it wouldn't congeal, so they start boiling it to make blood pudding and all of this. And then they would have quite a feast after the family. Everybody sat down, drank, had quite a party.
Yeah, and I remember my grandfather. Oh, we'd be coming out of school, and there'd be my grandfather with his shovel and his wheelbarrow following the horses. And they say my grandfather had the best garden in town because he followed the horses.
My grandmother lived in the old company houses up there, and she had a barn with a half a dozen cows or so. And she used to grow all types of vegetables and all that, and milk the cows herself. My grandfather wasn't a farmer. My grandmother took care of it, or everything. It's funny. And there was young fellas used to bring the cows way up to Old River Road and Sales Hill Road, and young fellas used to bring my grandmother's cows out, then go pick them up and bring them back to the barn, you know.
Yeah, I grew up in the brick block. Jumped the bricks. Well, we lived in a brick block. The company owned, at the time it was Manville Jinks that owns they had company housing all over the village. And we lived at one time on the top of the hill, but during the Depression, my mother couldn't afford the rent, so we moved in the brick block. But at that time, all we paid in the brick block was $1.10 a week. And there was, before we moved there, it was even cheaper, below $1 a week.
Yeah, I played a lot of baseball. I'd bring some fillings from the mill. I'd make a baseball, and we'd play ball. We couldn't afford the ball.
I used to like to go down the Blackstone River and catch fish. I used to have a rowboat and go out, catch frogs. I used to like to eat frog legs every day if I could. Cook them in the backyard, you know. Between the brick blocks, you only had that little bit of land, but it was enough.
I remember going to see President Wilson in Boston parade. What a beautiful wife he had. I never forget her. Hey, what a beautiful woman. And him a homely looking mutt.
One of the great things about living on Church Street or 67 Winter Street was the barn that my grandfather built right next to the house. Now, there were 3 stalls in that barn. The middle one went all the way back to an elevator on which my grandfather would load the hay and bring it upstairs. That barn, as we called it, was great fun for us kids because we could play in there, and especially my brother Phil, who had a terrific imagination, would play cowboys and Indians there all day long.
Here you have my father, Alfred Glider with his double runner, a type of toboggan. They just came down the hill on Spring Street, quite daring. Can you imagine trying that now?
All we remembered was riding down this hill in the bobsleds, the big bobsleds we used to have. We used to come down one hill here, then we'd have to haul it all the way up the hill to get a ride and try to jump on as many as you can, you know, coming down on those ski runs, you know. We used to have heavy son of a gun. You know, it was very weird. That's one of the things we used to enjoy. The winters were great and there was no traffic, you know. So we'd just go up and down
When we were kids and it snowed, we would always go sledding. Our favorite hill was Cross Street, extremely steep, and then it flattened out for a long run to, I think, Old River Road. And when it snowed, we had dozens and dozens of kids on that hill, sledding down that hill. It was great fun.
My mother and father used to make a party for all our relatives at Christmas. And my father and I used to go hunting, getting rabbits and partridge and quail and pheasant, you know. And we'd put them in a cold storage room down in the cellar. And when it's Christmas time, they cooked them. And they'd make spaghetti and meatballs. And he always had a jug of wine on the table. And sometimes he used to drink it right from the jug, but he used a jug and he'd pour wine for everybody. Take it or leave it, you're going to get it. He used to make his own wine in the cellar. I remember he had a big press, and my job was to turn that thing, keep squeezing the grapes, keep squeezing the grapes.
When we went to parochial school, we had 2.5 hours of French and 2.5 hours of English. And if we couldn't express ourselves in English, the teacher would say it in French. So we more or less spoke more French than English, you know.
Practically everybody in Manville had an accent. We spoke French all the time, especially around the brick block.
Everybody used to speak French. My first language was French. I had to learn English when I went to St. James School, École Saint-Jacques.
No, I remember that the nuns were quite severe. The nuns were quite severe, and they had the pointer, and if you did something wrong, they asked you to stick your hand out, and they give you a whipping in your hand with that pointer.
In fact, on Fridays, we would all run from school to Ben's Lunch for fish and chips. I would go home for lunch every day, although my parents both worked, and my mother would leave lunch for me. But on Fridays, I would get $1 from my mother or father, and the whole group of us would run like the dickens from school to beat the older guys to Ben's Lunch to have fish and chips. And this is when I was in probably the 5th and 6th grade.
And I remember Johnny Potier used to have especially in the wintertime when there'd be snow, he'd have the wagon with the sled, you know, just it'd be the sled instead of the wagon, and he'd have to go by our street, and we knew what time he'd go by, so we'd wait at the corner for him to come. We'd jump on the sled to drive us to school.
I lived on Pearl Street, so we used to cut between the buildings, bring a cardboard with us, and slide down the hill to the school.
One of the important places in our youth was Murray's Pond, which is now behind the Little League field, because that's the place where we went skating every winter. We'd go skating up there all day until our feet froze and we came home. And the biggest problem, of course, is clearing snow. If you got a big snow, it was tough to clear the ice. And I remember one winter when the ice was very thick and the snow was very deep. Father Boudreau brought a tractor onto the ice to clear the snow. And I can remember the ice going up and down on the weight of the tractor, but it never went through.
I put my skate on one day, and one went off, went in the hole. The guy was fixing there. And I no more. In those days, you know, money was scarce. I lost my skate. We used to go to Morris Pond.
I grew up on Spring Street Hill. There were 2 10-family cold water flats. I lived in one of them. Above me, there were 2 6-family cold water flats, a 4th-family cold water flat below, a 6-family cold water flat across the street. Needless to say, I had plenty of playmates. We would play in the streets. We would, in the wintertime, we would slide down the hills. There were relatively few cars, especially during World War II. And it was relatively safe. We had the ball field behind St. James Church. We had a couple others, open fields scattered around the village. We had pickup ball teams. Everything was very nice.
Well, Saturday night, everybody took their bean pot and went down to, in my time, it was Gerwell's Bakery. And you would remember at home, I had a little red wagon, and we'd put the bean pot in there, and the people upstairs would bring theirs down. And I'd have the 2 bean pot, and I'd bring it to the bakery. And they would bake them all night long. Then Sunday morning after church, everybody went down to the bakery, got their pot, and bring it home. I think we got French bread, too. I think they used to bake the French bread, and you take that and you beat it at home, and that was the breakfast. And you wait some just about every day of the week after that. So it was really good, and the smell, oh, it was wonderful.
And there used to be a bakery there where people every Saturday used to bring their pot of beans and have brown bread, raisin brown bread. And they had a big oven. Then they used to use those long pallets and stick the pot of beans and way into the ovens. And the following morning, you'd pick them up after church.
When we were youngsters, the village was our playground. No one worried about where you were and where you roamed. People didn't worry if you were in their backyards or in their cellars.
Everybody knew everybody's family's name. Everybody knew everybody's children's name. They used to say, hey, there's a little Gauthier guy, they all knew all the families. Everybody cared about somebody.
One of the tricks we used to do, we used to cross the bridge here on the dam, barefooted. You know, when it was just skimming, we'd walk across that doggone dam. You know, my parents didn't know.
I also remember the Manville Brass Band playing, because we had a lot of parades in those days. And some of them were military parades, like Memorial Day and Veterans Day later on. And the band hall was right up the street from us. I could see it out of my bedroom window. And we could hear them playing at night if you had your windows open in the summertime. And they were very good. My grandfather had played for that band. He was a cornetist back then.
Manville Brass Band, that used to be quite a thing. They used to come out. Every Monday we used to sit down there and listen to them practice.
They had a parade at least 3 days. The 4th of July, the Armistice Day, and Memorial Day. And as kids, we always look forward to that. Practically all the World War I veterans, I was a kid, and they parade, and then they have their ritual near the monument, and they fire the volley, you know, saluting the departed comrades. And we always follow the parade, and when they fire their volley, we pick up those expanded shells.
You know, on the bridge, the girders, we'd cross over on the girders from one to the other just for a stunt to see who would make it.
In the summertime, if you walked by the saloons, you could smell that sour beer taste. And you could hear the people from inside swearing, because swearing was a favorite activity of Manville people. You know, the common folk who worked in the mills and were uneducated, so they punctuated their speech with swear words, and which is very interesting because French Canadians have an interesting way of swearing. You couldn't just use one word at a time if you were any good. The good swearers would string words along, you know, 4, 5, 6 words in a row, and it had to be done with a certain cadence and a certain rhythm. And the best ones always swore standing up and talking out of the sides of their mouth, you know. And it was an art form. It was really the craziest thing. Let me give you an example. They would say, Tabarnak Calvaire de Christ Patin, you know, with that punctuation at the end. I mean, that was classy, you know. I mean, that guy was to be respected if he swore like that. And we often heard them swearing from the saloons down the street. And many times we heard them swearing as they were walking up the street on Saturdays with a towel under their arms, going up to the Club Montcalm, which is a French-Canadian club. They had the only showers for some of these people. So they would walk up there with a towel under their arm on Saturday to take their weekly shower.
The toilet in the brick blocks in Manville, it was about 4 by 4 with just a commode there And over the commode, you had like a medicine cabinet, in our house anyway. And there was no bath. You had to go to the sink in the kitchen and take a sponge bath. That's the reason that whenever we got to be 16 years old, we had to go to we joined the Mount Calm Club.
Dorothy remembers her father talking about riding the trolley to Woonsocket.
It would cost them 5 cents to go to Woonsocket. And instead of saying Woonsocket Fall, they used to say Ovalia Fall. And that's what they were calling it. But it was 5 cents to go up to Woonsocket and 5 cents back.
I was only 8, 9 years old. We used to go to Woonsocket to see his parent. Right across the mill there. We'd go by those little trolleys, circle around and up by Cumberland, and they'd drop us off on Mendon Road, and we have to walk through the field to go up to his parent. The trolley has a certain place they could go, that was it.
Oh, I rode the train often. 10 cents you go to Providence. Every Saturday my father used to send me to Providence and buy a lobster. Cost him 30 cents.
The train, when I was very young, when Al Smith was running for president, he came through Manville and everybody went by the railroad track on Railroad Street, all along Railroad Street would go to see Al Smith. And everybody was Al Smith. They used to say Al Smith will never be elected because he's Catholic. And of course, I don't know that that had anything to do with it, but Hoover won. Hoover was elected.
I remember the trains coming through. They used to come in quite often. Used to have long trains, freight trains coming. And that, they used to make a stop over here and then continue on right into Woonsocket.
My grandfather's livery business, which he ran out of the barn that he built next to the house, would have three wagons and several horses, and he would deliver usually furniture, because this was a time when there were a lot of immigrants moving around Rhode Island, and many immigrants would move from Woonsocket to Fall River, from Fall River to Manville, and there was a lot of moving around being done by families in those days, and that's the business he was in.
Oh yeah, when my father did the plowing then with one horse, they used to plow with a V-plow, with wood. And they used to have big stone, in the middle, so that to keep the plow, way down. And that's how they used to clean the sidewalks from snow.
I worked on the horse and cart. I was probably 10, maybe 11. And he would take the order, go in the house, take the order. Or people, in the summertime, people would come out with a plate. They would come out to the cart and look at the meat, and they would cut and slice the meat, and they would put it on their plate, and they'd go back in the house. Most of the time, my father would go in the house, take their order, fill out the order, and package it, and I would take it back upstairs and collect the money. They had a route all through town, specific route.
Yeah, but I remember Goosey's market, because when I was 7 years old, I started getting the horse and buggy from the barn, taking it down to the butcher shop, loading it, and going around doing about 3 or 4 houses till I get home. About 7 o'clock, I'd go up the house, have a little breakfast, and go to school. I used to get $1 a week. But I can remember old Tom. Used to be a big black horse, used to pull that wagon. Here I was about 8 or 9 years old, probably weighing about 90 to 100 pounds. And there wasn't that many cars, so if there's a car, sometimes he used to spook him, and he used to go. Here I was holding the reins and standing on there, pulling on it. The thing weighed about a ton or so, as if I was going to stop him. The only time he stopped is when he got tired. Then he pulled to the side of the road, and that was it. Old Tom, like a big black horse.
When I got to be a little older, maybe 14, I used to work for this guy that sold Gilroy General Store. And I spent a lot of time, I liked horses, and I spent a lot of time working with them. I was only about 15. They'd send us with a team of horses to some place near the reservoir and also across the river. There was a grown-up man that would go with me, but I'd drive a team of horses to go out and haul cordwoods. And I loved to work with horses, and I did it for something like a quarter a day or something like that at that time.
Back in those days, there were no refrigerators, and people kept their milk and meat cold by storing it next to a block of ice in an ice box in the house. Ice was cut in the wintertime in nearby ponds and packed in sawdust so that it would keep throughout the summer. The ice was delivered to residents in the village by horse and wagon.
My father used to peddle ice in Manville. We had an ice house over here, and they used to peddle ice, and with horse and teams. And of course, Manville, they had all those hills, summer, winter, and all those hills. So my father would have to park the ice team up on Central Street and walk down, halfway down the hill with the ice and put the ice in the people's ice box. Then after that, he would get in the lower part of Manville and walk up, because you couldn't have a horse and team go down that steep hill. It would land in the Blackstone River.
At that time, you had the old Frigidaires, where you'd just stick, chunk of ice in the top of the Frigidaire, let it drain, let the water drain underneath. And they used to cut it was deep, and they used to cut it in chunks, and then they'd haul it into the ice house. The ice house was also floating on the ice.
They had enough ice for year-round. It was a big enough ice house. They would come in every morning. My uncles would go in and take in blocks of ice were like probably 100, 150 pounds.